Australian students are falling behind other developed countries in reading, maths and science. That's according to new results from an international student assessment. The results represent a long-term decline in student performance and show for the first time the performance of Australian teenagers in mathematics has fallen to the OECD average. The Education Minister says the results should have alarm bells ringing, telling states and territories that teachers need to get back to basics. Let's go live now to the Education Minister, Dan Tehan. Thanks for your time. Were you shocked by these results?
Laura, these are very disappointing results, and as I've said, alarm bells should be ringing. We should be performing at the top of the band, and we need to get that's where we need to be aiming to get to, and that's why next week's meeting of state and territory education ministers is going to be so important, because we've all got to come along, be ambitious and implement the reforms that we know, that we've been advised will turn these results around.
It's now a long-term trend, Minister. The alarm bells have been ringing for some time. Why were you surprised?
Because what we saw was a steep reduction, especially when it came to maths and science, and I don't think any of us were anticipating to see such a steep decline, especially in those two areas. And that's why my hope is that everyone sees this as the alarm ringing, that we need to really refocus our agenda on turning these results around, and that's what I'm hoping that all of us can do next week. We need to work together on this. The federal government doesn't run any of the schools. The states and territories have that responsibility, but we want to work with them. We want to be bold, we want to be ambitious with them and make sure that we turn these outcomes around.
No, but you do fund them, so do you take any responsibility?
Look, all of us have to take responsibility when it comes to teaching our students, when it comes to teaching our children. I'm a parent, I've got kids at school, I've got a role to play, our schools have a role to play, all of us have a role to play. So everyone should share in the responsibility of turning these outcomes around. And the federal government, through the funding, record funding it provides to government schools, to Catholic schools, to independent schools, we've got a role to play. We want to bring all state and territory education ministers together, get them to agree on these Gonski national school reforms that we know will get our students focusing on the basics, literacy and numeracy, and if they can get that right, we know that their educational achievements will improve.
Minister, this does seem like a pretty significant failure that hasn't had, happened overnight. It's been a slow and, as you say, steep decline in the last year. What has failed? Is this the failure of the Gonski model? Is this the failure of COAG?
Well, I think what we've seen is that we've seen a decline over a period of time. Now, I don't think
of which the whole time you've been in government, haven't you?
So there has been a decline over the last 20 years. But Laura, I go back to that point. The federal government doesn't run schools in this country. State and territories have that responsibility. Our responsibility is to work with them and to work with them to put the reforms in place that we need to change these outcomes. Now, the Gonski reforms are on the table next week in Alice Springs. So we need all state and territory education ministers working with the Commonwealth Government to implement these reforms. We know through the work that David Gonski did, the assessment that he did, that these reforms will start to turn these outcomes around. But we've got to adopt them.
When?
And we've got to be bold in adopting them.
Isn't it a fair question for parents and students to be asking when that turnaround will happen?
Well, my hope is that that turnaround will start next week when we get all state and territory education ministers agreeing to these bold reforms, reforms which put literacy and numeracy at the heart of everything that we do, reforms that mean that teachers have the materials that they need so that they can help every single student in a classroom improve their literacy and their numeracy. That's what's on the table next week. That's what we all need to agree to.
Is it your way or the highway, though?
No, no way. Because if that one state or territory education minister doesn't agree, then we don't agree to anything. That's the way that COAG works. So all of us have to come to the table prepared to listen, prepared to say, OK, we've got to put students first. And that's what I'm appealing to every state and territory education minister to do. David Gonski has mapped out the reform process that we need to adopt. All of us need to get on board.
What have we got for the $20 billion or so that we've spent in less than a decade?
Well, money's important. We've got to make sure that we invest into schools. But I think we all now realise that equally as important is student results and outcomes. And that now needs to be the focus. We've got to put aside this obsession that some have on money, money, money and refocus on results and outcomes for our students.
So why isn't this about money? How do you know this is not about funding?
Well, because if we look at Estonia, they invest half what we do per student when it comes to education, and they're getting better results than we are. So it's not just about money. It is about making sure that what is being taught the correct way, is focused on the things that need to be focused on. It's making sure that you've got the support there for our teachers, making sure that they're allowed to teach, that the curriculum's not so cluttered that they're just racing through all this material, and that they've got the support material that they need to be able to teach, so that every student gets a better outcome than what they're getting now.
So you rule out any increase in funding?
Well, we're putting record funding in. There's a record $310 billion going in from the Commonwealth Government. So we have agreed with all the states and territories, the funding models, the record funding's going in there, $20 billion extra
Is some of that money then, Minister, being wasted?
Well, we've got to make sure that it is going to the right places and leading to the right outcomes, and that's what we'll be doing. Well, we're doing that next week. So we've had a process, we've had this looked at, we've had David Gonski do his review, all state and territories have considered it. Next week, it's time to make decisions. It's time to back these reforms. We need all state and territories to agree to them. One doesn't, then the whole thing gets put on hold for another 6 months.
Okay.
We need every state and territory to just say, let's do it.
Well, it sounds like we're at a crisis level. So what is your commitment to get the states and territories together and not leave that room until there is an agreement?
These results will be the #1 discussion item on the agenda, and I do not want to leave Alice Springs until we have agreement to implement these bold reforms, which I think will go a long way to turning these outcomes around. We need to put the students first.
Dan Tehan, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Laura.